Arc 7, The Land of the Wolves. Chapter 1, Initiation. As soon as the plume of smoke cleared up, Ram felt a rare sense of helplessness. Ram. She opened her pale crimson eyes, straining them as she peered into the room which still had smoke hovering over it. However, even as she did so, searching for something amongst the emptiness, the ones which she was seeking were nowhere to be seen. She looked for those people in the room where a large hole had appeared, someone moving, or someone in black, along with the adorable blue one. However, they were nowhere to be found. Ram. Ram's shoulder was grabbed from behind as she'd tried to take a step forward, bringing her back to her senses. She realized that she'd been about to step through a cracked bit of the floor. If she hadn't been stopped in her tracks, she might have fallen. How clumsy of her, to literally not even see what was beneath her feet. I'm glad you're safe, Ram. And Patrashjan, are you okay as well? Ram, Amelia, Sama. Ram bit her lip. Meanwhile, the one who'd grabbed her by the shoulder was Amelia, who should have been on the upper floors. While panting slightly, Amelia checked to make sure Ram was okay, as well as how the black earth dragon, Patrash, who was crouched down behind them, was getting on. Finally, while looking at them, Ram regained enough of her composure to take in the state of her surroundings. The corridor in what should have been a robust stone tower had collapsed, with the floor and ceiling both smashed to pieces. She could see the sky and sand of the Sandsea from across the wall, which now had a hole in it. A parched breeze was blowing in as a result. However, the place that had gotten damaged the most was the room where Ram, Patrash and company had been staying in until just before, that's to say, the room they'd so dubbed the Green Room. Ram. The room had been chock full of grass and ivy, covering the walls, floor, and even going up all the way to the ceiling. Nevertheless, the room was now unrecognizable from its original state, with its natural erosion of many, many years torn up root and branch. That included its beds, which were woven from grass and ivy, as well as the faint light the spirit's presence gave off, all of it. That, and their biggest problem was Amelia, Ram. Where did Subaru and Rem go? They're safe, right? Standing by Ram's side, Amelia peered into the area where the green room had previously stood. Ram wasn't able to answer her question straight away, even though she knew that her painful silence itself served as an answer. First of all, let's try and sort out what happened. We're not going to be able to talk about things calmly unless we do the dot. Looking around at everyone who'd gathered within the room as she said that, Anastasia took charge of the situation. Anastasia's white fox scarf echidna was still wrapped around her. She brushed her fingers through her slightly dusty fur as she spoke. Anastasia, so, about that black shadow that attacked the tower just before. Julius, it's gone, at least for now. Thanks to the power of the divine dragon, Volcanica, I'd say. Echidna, both the dragon and the shadow's movements were so sudden, it made us really wonder what the heck was happening, huh? Inside the tower, the ones who'd come back safe and sound began to share what had happened, starting first with Anastasia, and then Julius and Echidna following her lead. Much like Anastasia and Echidna, Julius' white nightgarb was also covered in grime. However, that wasn't just because of the heated battle that had taken place in the tower, it was also heavily due to the effects of the aforementioned event. Nevertheless, none of these three had ended up with any extra injuries. On that point itself, you could say it was a relief. That in itself was thanks to the achievement wrought by the divine dragon, Volcanica, on the topmost floor of the tower. Beatrice, Volcanica cleaved the looming shadow with its breath, I suppose. If not for that, we would have probably been in for a world of hurt, in fact. Anastasia gave Beatrice a nod in response to what she'd said, as the latter folded her short arms together. In all honesty, when Volcanica had unleashed its breath so suddenly, Anastasia had uncharacteristically resigned herself for death. Things had happened so quickly that there hadn't been any way to deal with it. Though of course she couldn't say that she'd completely relaxed her guard just because of that single breath. Julius, the divine dragon's response to the crisis dawning upon us was simply magnificent, but even so, the state it's in isn't great, that remains unchanged still. Currently though, it seems to be keeping itself quite obedient and following Amelia-sama's instructions. Anastasia, out of consideration for Julius, I'ma try and avoid Callan M. Senile. But, 'tis all the same as the divine dragon San bein' Ascarion. Anyways, as for what happened, it's exactly as Beatrice-chan says. Beatrice, I suppose. The only one who could have dealt with a situation as abrupt as that was Volcanica. What would have become of them now, had the dragon not blown away the looming shadow for them? Yet, they couldn't start jumping around in joy. There was a ton of M. But, they all went towards Onii-san and stuff. Anastasia, Meili-chan. Meili, my apologies. Anastasia. Meili didn't take care with her word choice, almost as if she were upset, and for that, Anastasia chided her. Meili gave her a sincere apology as she looked towards Ram and Amelia, both having kept their silence. In hindsight, the ones who'd received the damage from that shadow had been the two from the Amelia camp, Subaru and Rem. Thus, the damage the Anastasia camp had suffered was practically zilch. Anastasia, though it's not like I can actually say that, we're all traveling together after all. Anastasia muttered that to herself before then catching a glimpse of Julius and Echidna. They had been working together with Amelia's group during the time she'd traded places with Echidna, when she'd been sleeping at the depths of her own consciousness. It went without saying for Echidna, whom she'd known for around 10 years, but even the practically brand spanking new Julius, at least as far as her memories were concerned, could easily tell that she was shook. On that point, it was quite the surprise to Anastasia that Beatrice, who should have been quite close to them, had come to this meeting. Anastasia, Beatrice John, are you alright? Oh wait, no, it ain't proper of me to use a word like alright, but still, you haven't gotten yourself into a panic, no? Beatrice, Betty panicking wouldn't mean it'd bring back Subaru and Rem, in fact. Right now, the main issue in question is messing up our first move due to panic, I suppose. I'd specifically like to avoid that, in fact. Anastasia, first move? By that, do you mean? Amelia, bringing back Subaru and Rem. Taking action for that, yeah? Anastasia raised her eyebrows quizzically as she tried to question Beatrice. However, Amelia interrupted her, still while supporting Ram by her shoulder. Amelia's amethyst eyes pierced right through Anastasia, her eyes widening in surprise a tad at the intensity of her glare. She wet her lips with her tongue. Anastasia, dang, I thought you were gonna be dejected as heck, but that's one hell of a look you've got in your eyes. What do you mean? Amelia, it's really nothing complicated. Subaru and Rem ended up being swallowed by that shadow and taken away from us. Volcanica did drive it away, but he was just a tad too slow. Even so. Ram, they didn't die from it. I'm sure of it. While still being propped up by Amelia, Ram opened her eyes and replied. Then she gently touched the part of her on her forehead, the part where presumably her Oni clan horn had been, as she let out an exhausted sigh. It was what served as the basis of her words, which felt full of conviction. Anastasia, the Oni tribes. Ah, wouldn't that be the sisters synesthesia? So you're saying that you're linked with Remsan? Ram, yep, that's right. Rem is alive. No clue about Barusu. Beatrice, Subaru's alright as well, I suppose. Betty can guarantee that, in fact. Beatrice shouted in anger, almost red in the face, in response to Ram's very Ram-like words. After all, she was Beatrice, the spirit who'd made a contract with Subaru. Her words did have some credibility to them. In other words, it meant that the two of them who had vanished had been confirmed to be alive from separate angles. Julius, in regards to Subaru, we have his connection with Beatrice Sama's contract, and in regards to Miss Rem, we have Miss Ram's synesthesia. Both of those are worth believing in. Besides, I too would like to hope. Anastasia, quite the honesty there. Well, either way, I too would rather prefer that Natsuki-kun and Remsan were safe and sound. Anastasia stroked her scarf after Julius replied, as if to say getting too close to them would be a problem. They were working with Amelia's group as collaborators for the time being, but the fact that they were competing with each other in the royal selection hadn't changed. She didn't want them to get the wrong idea about that and add to their troubles. Nevertheless, it was precisely because they were fighting each other that they ought to repay their debts without fail. Meili, well then? Like, it's super duper good that Oni-san and stuff are alive, but where are they? Failing to read the mood positively, Meili asked them that while playing around with the tiny crimson scorpion balanced on her head. Julius opened his mouth in reaction to her question and began to speak. Julius, well, though I wouldn't be able to explain them in great detail, that shadow was the product of Een magic. Or at the very least, the Een attribute. It should be the same sort that's sealing the likes of the Witch of Envy in her shrine, and Roy Alfred in the dragon carriage. If we presume this to be the case, then as for our resident expert. Beatrice, that would be Betty, I suppose. My prognosis isn't all that different from Julius either, in fact. That thing was a clump of Een, I suppose. It's close to a shamak that's been given direction, in fact. Echidna, shamak? Isn't that the basic magic of the Een attribute? How was it then so powerful? Beatrice, I knew there was going to be quite a few humans who'd misunderstand since there are hardly any users of it. However, it's troubling that even you think of it like that, when you're a spirit like me, in fact. Echidna, who had taken up her white fox form, was stared at reproachfully by Beatrice, causing her to cower her head. Giving a sigh at her reaction, Beatrice raised one of her fingers and said, "May I suppose?" Beatrice, shamak's special quality is in separation, in fact. A low-grade shamak separates one's body from their awareness, whereas a high-grade shamak rends space from itself, I suppose. Betty's door crossing is one such application, linking two rooms together and achieving something close to teleportation, in fact. Ram, that was the contraption Beatrice Sama had set up in the previous mansion. It was a real pain having to call her for mealtimes, so to be quite honest, I'd gotten fed up with it. Beatrice, it really upsets Betty that you'd say that so honestly right here, right now, I suppose. I do believe I am sorry about it, but the apologies can wait until later. Anyways, Shamak, in essence, can separate space from space if so inclined, as well as that, it can separate objects, no matter how strong they are. It's the Witch of Envy's speciality, in fact. Anastasia, from your explanation, aren't you saying that Natsuki-kun and Remsan have been scattered into pieces? If that shadow was as deadly as that, then what she'd said felt just like something that branded Subaru and Rem's survival, who'd been swallowed by it, as being hopeless. Beatrice, however, shook her head at Anastasia's question. Beatrice, what I mentioned right now was an allegory, I suppose. At least, that shadow wasn't something that was set to chop Subaru and Rem into pieces, in fact. But it was going to take them within and whisk them away somewhere, I suppose. Echidna, somewhere. Across space. In this situation, I imagine it would be to where she is? Ram, after all, there's the matter of Barusu's miasma. Echidna broke down Beatrice's exposition into simpler terms, and at the end of that, Ram provided the reason why. The miasma that enveloped Subaru, which had greatly agitated the witch beasts en route to the watchtower, was now a well-known fact amongst the royal selection candidates. Regarding this miasma thing, both its cause and its finer details were unknowns. Ram, all I know about the miasma is that it attracts witch beasts to it, and that the people who are connected with the witch cult often emanated in spades. That's pretty much it. Emilia, although Subaru's been chased by witch beasts quite a few times, he's got nothing to do with the witch cult. I get that it's pretty suspicious, but... Anastasia, no need to fret, don't worry, I ain't casting doubt on that now, Emilia-san. Emilia, oh? Thank goodness. Subaru is a good boy, so... Emilia patted her chest in relief, however, the issue was still very much there. Just like Anastasia had said, the thread of thought regarding Subaru being connected to the witch cult was no longer inside her. Nevertheless, the fact that they didn't know Subaru's origins still brought forth doubts within her. She didn't think that Subaru was someone with ill intent. However, ill intent that one wasn't conscious to was a thing too. There was a chance that, behind all of his good intent, Subaru's existence was a ticking time bomb in itself. Anastasia, yeah, so your concern is unnecessary, I got that much from how you started the sentence off. The shadow that swallowed Natsuki-kun and Remsan up was the one that whisked them away to somewhere. The real question is, where ta? Echidna, as well as what happened due to Volcanica's breath having interfered with it. Beatrice and Ram, who were linked with the two of Subaru and Rem respectively, probably had a rough idea of their whereabouts. Searching for them was going to be a tall order, if all they knew was that they were alive, without knowing exactly where they'd been hurtled off to. At the very least, the option of not searching for them was not available to anyone in this place. Emilia, please, you two, where are Subaru and Rem? Tell me please. Beatrice and Ram exchanged looks, having turned towards Emilia's sincere appeal. Then, after a few seconds of silence from the both of them. Beatrice, he's south, in fact. Ram too senses that she's in that same direction. I'm not sure of her exact position, but I think she's fairly far away. Emilia, south? South from here we have the Emilia furrowed her well-defined eyebrows straight after Beatrice and Ram had both mentioned they were south. Though she must have been giving it her all to envision the map of the world in her mind, Anastasia raised her hand in her stead. Currently they were in the Augria sand dunes situated in the easternmost part of the world map. As far as south from here went, Bakutat or Flanders, of the 5 great cities, were the most likely, however. Julius, in regards to that alone, the state of the two is inscrutable. Seemingly having arrived at the same idea, Julius spoke Anastasia's mind for her. From the way he got into sync with the speed of her thoughts, Anastasia valued him as being ideal as her knight even more, all while batting one of her eyes shut and saying, indeed. Anastasia, 'tis quite the distance, but if they find themselves around those parts, then we can say that the damage incurred would be negligible. Yet, despite that, both of your faces look pale. Do you both mean to say he's way more south? Emilia, way more south, you can't mean. Meili, they ended up going all the way down to the Valachian Empire in the south? Meili's surprise was minimal compared to how shocked Emilia was. But it was safe to say that Meili's reaction was down to the fact that she hadn't comprehended the scale of things. Given that, Beatrice and the others' reactions were all perfectly understandable. If Subaru and Rem had crossed through the country, and if they'd crossed into the Southern Empire, they had a real problem at hand. Anastasia, if I'm not mistaken. The Kingdom of Lugunica and the Valachian Empire in the south signed a non-aggression pact that would last for the entire royal selection. Isn't that right, Julius? Julius, that's correct. I imagine you wouldn't know about this, but I also went there to tie down the agreement. Me, Reinhardt, Felis and such met the Emperor in person. Emilia, from what I'd heard, we were on really bad terms with the Empire, but if you did that, then are we okay with them now? So if we were to go and search for Subaru and Rem? Julius, no, that's not going to fly. Julius lowered his brows with a shake of his head in response to Emilia's timid question. He softly cast his yellow eyes down, which glittered like jewels, emblazoned on his handsome features. Julius, the Empire has forbidden travel between itself and the kingdom since several months ago, for the time being. Due to the royal selection, the same thing happened with the Holy Kingdom of Castico in the north, however they've already rescinded their ban. Echidna, I guess that means the one the Empire set hasn't been rescinded. Though we did travel to the watchtower, so because of that we don't have the latest information. So if the situation there hasn't changed. Emilia, going there to help Subaru and Rem is going to be tough? Julius, yes, unfortunately. Though they exchanged various thoughts about it, Julius concluded with these mere words of regret. Anastasia, too, could only come to the same conclusion as Julius. It would be impossible to break in from the front where entering the Valachian Empire was concerned. They'd have no choice but to look for a secret way in, and in addition to that, they'd also need to find the time and contacts for it. There'd be no quick and easy way here. Surely Emilia would be in an absolute hurry when thinking about the two people whose status remained unknown. Emilia, we need to move quickly. We'll receive Volcanica's blood and bring it back to Pristella. Then we'll take the gluttony we captured to the royal capital, yeah? Beatrice, Emilia. Emilia, I know Beatrice. I can't help but feel really, really impatient. But we won't be able to help Subaru and Rem out, even if we rush things here. We've gotta remain calm. However, Emilia's calm decision surprised Anastasia, just as it seemed she would have gotten into a panic. She gave a resolute nod at Beatrice, also similarly surprised. Her eyes were quivering, her voice was shaking a bit, yet she was giving it her all to keep a grip of herself. It was just like she was saying, I'm not going to fold my arms together and sit back for even a second if it means getting Subaru and Rem back. Emilia, you two, Subaru and Rem must be together, right? Ram, I just double-checked with Beatrice-sama, we think they probably are. Emilia, alrighty. Then if that's the case, I'm sure Subaru will go to great lengths to protect Rem. That's why we needn't worry about Rem. Even though Subaru's a little scary. Though her belief in Subaru was strong, in regards to the same kind of worries, Anastasia did agree as well. Natsuki Subaru had lost his memories for a bit in the tower, as a result of being left to his own devices. That boy with a propensity for self-punishment had a bad habit of making light of himself in order to protect the people precious to him. Just as it sometimes would encourage others, it also similarly served as a cause for concern. Anastasia, that said, guess all we can really do is count on Natsuki-kun's quick wits. Emilia-san is right, what we can't do is stay here grumblin' and moanin' inside the tower. We gotta get a move on. Julius understood loud and clear. Beatrice-sama, do inform us if there are any elements of concern. Beatrice, Subaru's body, I suppose. Subaru's gate can't expel mana out on its own since it's broken, in fact. If we leave him alone for too long, then it's going to burst due to a mana blockage, I suppose. Anastasia, I see. I'm sorta in the same boat, so I can really get on the same level as Natsuki-kun there. Anastasia's gate was defective by birth. She was unable to take in mana properly, such, for example, would be a critical defect for a mage. Nevertheless, this had no effect on the luck and knack for business needed for a merchant, so it didn't really bother her much. Echidna, Anna. Anastasia, I know. In regards to our problems, ain't we gonna talk about them separately a bit later? That aside, it doesn't look like we've got any time to slack off. Anastasia clapped her hands together, with everyone else nodding back at her signal. Their objective was to search for the whereabouts of Subaru and Rem, who'd both disappeared. For that, they would need to return from the Pleiades watchtower as soon as possible, in order to muster a search party as well. On top of that, they needed to fulfill one of the primary objectives that they'd come to the tower for. Melee, things are so hectic, to the point that I almost feel like I'm gonna pass out. Emilia, I know right. Still, Subaru and Rem must be having it way more tough. Emilia firmly clenched her fist, thinking of Subaru, who'd been hurtled off to somewhere far away. Seeing her face in profile, Melee, with the tiny crimson scorpion plopped on her head, narrowed her eyes and said yeah, of course, with a shrug of her shoulders. And just like that, the group began to busy themselves to get their preparations done, or so they were about to. Melee, come to think of it, Ramwani-san, did you tell Em about that thing? Ram. I still haven't. Anastasia and the others. That thing? Ram's face turned sour at Meili's rather abrupt question. All of their gazes turned towards Ram, clearly having not heard anything about it. With them all looking at her, Ram paused for a brief moment, and after that said, Ram, Emilia-sama, although I'm still not 100% sure about this. The one swallowed by the shadow and hurtled away to the Empire may not just be only Barusu and Ram. Emilia, not only the two of them. But you, Patrashan, and Meili are all accounted for, so shouldn't that be everyone who was in the green room? Meili, well, a girl appeared all of a sudden, before that shadow came kinda kerplowing in. And what's more, according to Onizen, it was the third gluttony or something. Anastasia and the others, the third gluttony. Anastasia and the others were taken completely aback after being told this tidbit they really could not disregard. And so, the discussion grew in intensity, regarding whether they should amend their actions going forward and getting the details which Ram had kept under wraps regarding this matter out of her. As that went on, within the now turned bedlam of the Pleiades watchtower, Emilia clasped her hands in prayer in front of her chest, all the while looking out of the huge hole where the green room had once stood. Emilia, please, Subaru. I really hope you'll be alright with Ram. As Emilia's small prayer drowned in the parched skies overhead, the sea of sand, at the same time far, far away. Subaru. Sitting atop an open meadow, caressed gently by a wandering breeze, was a boy, and in his embrace, a girl. The boy had black hair, and his eyes sharp as the edge of a dagger, with the whites being quite pronounced, a la the very known Sanpakugan, eyes that made his face to appear in a permanent scowl, a glare rumored to be all that is needed to kill a man. However, at that moment, his lips curved up ever so softly, and the corners of those eyes were wet. It took all he had to not break into a complete bawl. It was a natural outcome, of course. He'd waited for this very moment for so long. The memories of each day he passed in wait, in grief, none would allow him to look away for even the briefest of moments from the girl in front of him. The girl, embraced so dearly, looked at him through the locks of her bright, blue hair. Her eyes widened, though the strength to resist was barely present on her adorable face. It was as if she had woken from sleep, and was still caught up in her drowsiness. To be fair, that was indeed the truth of the matter. She'd finally woken up from a long, long slumber, so she'd quite obviously feel a disconnect from reality. Ram, Her lips moved, as if mulling over what he'd spoken of moments ago. As he watched, the boy Natsuki Subaru nodded vigorously. Subaru, yeah, exactly, that's exactly it, Rem. I'm your hero. I've been waiting for so long for. Rem. Subaru, Rem? Trying to stifle the tremble of his own voice, he desperately tried to pick up on Rem's. Perhaps due to being thirsty or something of the sort, though as her lips moved and her tongue flicked, her throat would not produce sound. Even so, he put his ear near her mouth, attempting to glean even a sliver of what Rem was trying to communicate to him. Her meager attempts to convey anything filled him with immense joy. Rem, M. Subaru, I'm listening, there's no need to rush it, okay? Rem, what are you trying to? Tell me, as he would have said, but was ultimately cut off. Once he'd drawn his ears close enough to listen to her, his trail of thought was halted as a hand pushed against his head and chin. Following that flow, he felt himself be turned over and fall to the ground. And then... Subaru, Rem? Subaru found himself with his back on the grass, and Rem straddled on top of him. Bewildered, he remained stiff in place. Staring down at him, Rem's eyes scanned him from top to bottom. She then released a quiet sigh and... Rem, what's your aim here? Tell me what you intend to do to me right now. Subaru. Rem, calling yourself some hero out of the blue end. Who's Rem? Tell me right now. Knees pressed down over Subaru's shoulders, her hands shot to his neck. With her weight bearing down on him, Subaru struggled to move, his legs twitching restlessly. However, the skill with which Rem had restrained him was somewhat awing. She'd left no room for him to regain his freedom. Subaru, Guck. Rem, if you refuse to speak, I will simply continue until you desire to do so. Please do not prolong your own suffering. Speak. What exactly are you? Subaru, Guh. He knew not whether it was involuntary or on purpose, but the strength with which Rem used to press against his neck left him no room to answer her with. As his mind dimmed due to the lack of oxygen, he realized letting this go on would result in his death. It had been so long, and even if it were a one-sided reunion, Subaru could allow it to end with Rem strangling him. Not like this. Even if nothing of Subaru remains in her memories. Subaru, Rem, are you feeling like speaking now? If so, I will, in good faith. Just then, as Rem frowned while looking at the signs of strained struggle on his face. Louis, dash. Ooh dash. Rem, Kia dash. Suddenly, a petite shadow slammed into Rem's body from the side, or rather, it leapt onto Rem and became entangled with her on the grass. With the weight gone, he rolled over and began coughing, then looked towards Rem with clouded, wet eyes. There, he saw the figure of a little girl struggling with Rem. Louis, you. Rem, what are you doing? Stop it, please. This isn't the time to be. Her blonde hair covering all of Rem, the little girl bared her teeth on her flushed red face as she howled. Subaru stopped, unable to form any thoughts upon witnessing this sight. Subaru took a breath and rushed to the two. And then... Subaru, oi. Get away from Rem, right now. Louis, you. Subaru pushed off the little girl who had been trying to pull on Rem's hair, Archbishop Louis Arnab, and held her down with her hands behind her back. The light-bodied gluttony attempted to struggle, but only in vain. The best she could currently do was kick about. Twists and groans were thrown in, but nothing more beyond that. Louis, you. You. Subaru, goddammit, you. Stop struggling, just stay put. Rem, are you okay? Did she do anything to you? Rem, and no, I'm fine. More than that, I keep asking you over and over. Subaru yelled as he held Louis down, to which Rem answered with crooked brows. With her eyes fixed on him, she attempted to stand on her feet. Rem, eh? And thumped back onto the ground, her knees having given away. Her strange way of falling down raised questions in Subaru's mind. Yet unaware she was being observed, she pushed on her knees and tried to stand up once more. However, Rem, my legs won't. Subaru, wait, you can't stand up? Rem, and no, that's not true. It's not true at all. Her voice trembled as she attempted to refute his strong claim. However, no amount of willpower allowed her to stand up. Far from being able to balance herself, she couldn't even put any power into her feet at all. Subaru, are you feeling weak because you've been asleep for so long? Wait, that can't be right. Wouldn't call the strength you used to push me over just now that of someone who's been bedridden as long as you. There was often talk of how one would eventually grow weaker over their long stay at the hospital, likely due to a lack of exercise. It was quite a well-known fact that those people require rehabilitation to stand and walk again, but would that truly end at the legs? It wasn't as if Rem had been moving her upper body during her hospitalization period. She'd been asleep for over a year, so it would only make sense for her to feel weak overall, and not just in her legs. And yet, this disconnect existed in her, in Rem's body. Likely, this was due to Subaru, wait, could it be because of the feedback she took from Nesama's fight? As his mind sifted through the possible reasons as to why Rem's body would behave like this, that was the conclusion he had reached. He'd heard from Ram in the green room about how her death battle against gluttony went down. Due to Subaru's worsening condition, Ram needed to change things to avoid being cornered. So she'd chosen to share her burden with Ram as her trump card. As a result, the majority of Ram's burden of pain, who was said to be the strongest of the Oni clan, flowed into Rem. Subaru remembered having that conversation. If that were the case, then Subaru, it's all my fault. He'd uttered a phrase he'd surely be rebuked by Ram for. However, as it stood, Subaru had been unable to fulfill the duty he himself had taken on himself, resulting in Ram needing to push herself further, which consequently affected Rem. It all went back to being Subaru's fault. Steeped in this situation, having none of his friends around that he could rely on, were only he, Rem, and Louis, who was continuing to act weird for God knows what reason, the responsibility he bore was all the more heavy. Rem, all your fault you say. Did you do something to me? Subaru, not at all, it was just a figure of speech, however. Rem, first things first. Who are you? And who am I? Subaru. Giving the legs that wouldn't obey her will properly a firm whack, Rem glared at Subaru with a tempest of fury in her eyes. Subaru felt something rather bitter, that his unpleasant guess had become reality, hearing Rem's heartbreaking complaint, which had felt like she was going to lose her temper. Rem had said, who am I? Who are you was still way better. However, her asking about who she was still something extremely gut-wrenching for Subaru, considering he'd been waiting so long to see Rem again. He'd had an inkling this would be the case, from the fact that she was referring to herself using I instead of Rem. Subaru, I guess she must be in the same state as Crush-san. Rem had had her name and memories taken away from her, resulting in her continued slumber. There were two other patterns found in the victims of gluttony, namely, the ones found with Julius, who'd had his name taken away from him, thus forgotten by the people around him, as well as with Crush, who'd had her memories taken away, having lost herself. When Rem had woken up, she'd done so having lost her own memories, in an amnesiac state. Her confusion was perfectly natural when you considered she was stuck in a situation this incomprehensible, along with a boy with mean-looking eyes to him, a girl who could do nothing but groan in her own legs, not working as she wished. Louis, you Without even realizing that Louis had grown quiet, as if she'd tired herself out from struggling around, she dropped from the exhausted Subaru's arms, and fell down on her backside, letting out a screech. She began to roll about, while rubbing her backside. Subaru didn't bother to give her any attention, instead he slowly made his way over to Rem's side. As Subaru drew closer to her, Rem kept an eye on him, all the while keeping her guard up strongly. Seeing that look in her eyes, he was reminded of the first time Rem had turned this hostility against him. It was easy to forget, because they'd gotten quite close after they'd warmed up to each other, but Rem originally was quite reserved, and was a rather difficult girl to get close enough to. In that respect, it was way easier with Ram, since she never changed how she interacted with him, both before and after they became closer. The scary part in fact though, was that according to one theory, there was even the chance that they didn't get along. Subaru, anyways, the matter of Nesama aside. Hey, you know. Rem, what is it? Just so you know, if you're planning on doing anything to me, I'll. Subaru, Rem. Rem, huh? Rem's tense expression turned into one of being taken by surprise. Subaru stopped in his tracks as he made his way over, keeping enough distance between them, so he'd be more than a step out of her reach. Subaru, it's Rem. That's your name. Once again, he called out her name. Rem. Rem sunk into silence, unable to hide her bewilderment, having had that gently poured against her. Nevertheless, she shifted her red tongue, which was barely visible behind her lips, and repeated Rem as if making sure of it. It was like she was making herself familiar with her own name anew. Subaru, in all honesty, I don't really know properly what happened either. Just that we got separated from our friends, and we're here, in this place which is God knows where. You should be able to understand that's quite the mess, right? Rem, well, While still very bewildered, Rem's eyes examined the grassland in their surroundings rather than Subaru. A breeze rustled through the grassland, the sun was high up in the sky, and he felt humidity against his skin. A muggy sensation that felt different to the parched air of the Agria sand dunes. He was in a place that was so different that the sensation he felt from the air had changed. In other words, Subaru, we can't expect to be helped immediately. We're gonna need to take the necessary actions to help ourselves from here, somehow or other. That's why. Rem, that's why what? What are you going to tell me to do? Me, and my legs which can hardly move and all. Subaru, I imagine you'll get all suspicious again once I say this sort of stuff, but I'd be just content with you being here for me. Breathing, talking to me, looking around the surroundings with your eyes, I'd be content with only that. Rem. You mean looking around with my eyes, and telling you whether the coast is clear? Subaru, no quite like that, though, that too would be fine. He was very much just content with Rem waking up, breathing, and speaking to him. Even though it was something rather unselfish, what Subaru had implored in regards to Rem having woken up, was only that she'd be in good health, thus these were, no word of exaggeration, his true intentions. Of course, he needed to solve the issue of her missing memories. That, and Amelia, Beatrice, Ram and everyone who'd been left behind in the tower with the matter of Subaru and his group having gotten separated from them, ought to be quite worried. He wanted to join up with them as quickly as possible. He wanted to get Ram to meet Rem, since she'd felt such love for her little sister, whom she didn't remember. Subaru, please, won't you trust me here? Even if I were to give up my life in exchange. No, it means squat were I to give up my life, so I shall protect you at all cost. I swear it. That's why. Rem. And say I take you up on your offer, then what will you do? Subaru, right. Would be pointless to act with no plan, so when it comes to one. Receiving Rem's prudent question, Subaru sought for the information needed to draw up a plan. As aforementioned, Subaru and the others were in a vast grassland, however, they could see large trees growing close to each other, encircling the grassland. Seeing they were intercepted by the canopies of the trees before they reached the horizon, the trees surrounding them at a 360-degree angle, it seemed like they were in an open grassland, a place such as that inside of a forest. Truthfully, it was nothing but dangerous to venture into a forest on a land he was completely unfamiliar with, but Subaru, firstly, the unbreakable rule when one gets lost in a forest is to let his allies know his location, using a GPS, but Rem, GPS? Subaru, I know. Nothing like that exists. It's just that Biko has the connection she has with me, so there's a possibility she could pinpoint my whereabouts with something similar. In a way, you could say my existence itself is a GPS. Depending on the situation, there was also the possibility that Ram's synesthesia would detect Rem's location. In that sense, both Subaru and Rem were fulfilling their roles as a GPS that connected them to their allies. Subaru, what's left is securing a source of water. It's important to get a hold of water, no matter what. It's probably better if we chose our base camp and start widening our field of search from there. Edible grass and fruits are. I was right to learn it from Klein-san. Gotta thank my mentor. During the process in which he learned parkour and how to handle a whip, Klein had hammered various techniques and knowledge into his head. There were times he nearly whined about giving up on the teachings of the versatile steward, but thanks to it being beneficial to him, Subaru could keep his guiding principle with him despite being in this situation. Anyway, Subaru, there's a lot of other stuff as well, but it's not like I'm trying to take action without a plan. Are you able to understand now? Rem, to an extent. Even if I wanted to resist, I'm in this condition, so. Subaru, that's a remark that I can get a glimpse of your honest thoughts from. Subaru tested a smile, trying to reassure her, but her reaction wasn't as good as he thought it would be. Having lost her memories, there was no foundation for Rem to build her trust for Subaru on. If she could move her legs freely, then she might have already escaped from him long ago. Though, he didn't want to think of the misfortune that happened to her as something fortunate. Subaru, your legs. I hope you can start moving around on them soon. Rem, look, even if you told me that, I don't know. What are you going to do? Subaru, I told you. Firstly, I'm planning on searching for water. There's the thing with your legs, so I'm thankful if you wouldn't act against me if you could. Saying that, Subaru closed the final step between him and Rem, crouching down and turning his back to her. If she looked at his posture, even Rem would know what he was trying to do. Rem, are you planning to bring me with you on your back? Subaru, there's also the choice to Princess carry you, but I won't last very long if I do that. If you would let me carry you on my back, I guess it's very helpful, personally. Rem. She fell silent for a while, staring at Subaru's pitiful expression. After that, she slowly blew out a sigh, and tentatively reached for his back. Rem's slender arms slunk above his shoulders, interlocking in front of his chest. Feeling the tender weight on his back, Subaru took his time in standing up, making sure he wouldn't shake Rem, who was clinging onto him. He felt her weight. However, what he thought while carrying her on his back was that she was light. During this 1 year, he had many opportunities to carry the slumbering Rem, but every time he did, he experienced how difficult it was to carry an unconscious person firsthand. The sensation wasn't there with the Rem who was holding onto him of her own accord. Rem? Is something the matter? Subaru, no, it's just that it was deeply moving, oddly enough. So, it's about the search for water, but. Rem, before that. What will we do about that girl? Subaru, Looking ahead of the place where Rem indicated by jerking her chin over his shoulder, Subaru remembered the problem. On the grassland, splayed out on the grass while patting her bottom, the area she had hit on the ground, was Louis, who was tangled up in her own long, blonde hair. What should he do about this Sin Archbishop that was acting strangely? Subaru. Even Subaru knew Louis's current state was unnatural. She was an opponent with a mental structure that couldn't be declared as decent, but it was because of her knavishness, not because he could see her previously hidden side of infantile regression. In fact, she was quite intelligent for her age, and she also had the room to ponder over her devilish thoughts, something that was similar to swiping her tongue across the splinters in one's heart. What about the behavior of the current Louis? Louis, having been licking Subaru's face at the time he woke up, growling like a toddler that didn't know how to speak, and throwing a tantrum like an infant as a result. There was no mistake that something immeasurable had occurred within her mind. However, Subaru, will that become a reason for me to pity her? She was abhorrently evil. That truth would always be unwavering. Louis, who he had faced at the last scene in the Hall of Memories, had been traumatized from experiencing return by death, becoming frightened of not only Subaru, but everything that existed in this world. At that point, she had already become enough of a poor, miserable girl. However, Subaru didn't save her. He didn't even think about wanting to save her. Despite having many different options held in front of them, they continuously picked the choices that went against humanity, ultimately losing the opportunity to correct those, and cut off their own way out of it. The Sin Archbishops were those kinds of people. Her two older brothers, as well as Louis herself, weren't exceptions either. Committing unforgivable evils, Louis Arnab had turned into a degenerate deserving of being damned to hell. Why did Subaru have to save someone like that? Rem, you won't help her? Subaru, it's complicated. I was in the same place as her, but she's not really my ally. In fact, she's on the opposite side of an ally. My heart won't ache, even if I left her here. Rem. Behind him, he heard Rem's breath catching in her throat, but it was a reaction that couldn't be helped. From Rem, who didn't know of Subaru's circumstances, Louis probably only appeared to her as a young, helpless girl, just as what she looked like. Even if her true identity was one of the desecrators that toyed with a great number of lives. That's why Subaru had one choice. Subaru, we're leaving her there. We can't bring a dangerous element with us, much less a burden. Picking up Louis from the advancing shadows was an error of misjudgment that he made in the tower. Perhaps, if Subaru had abandoned her then and there could have been the possibility this wouldn't have happened between him and Rem. It was certainly what people called it as causing 100 problems and bringing forth not a single profit. Rem is. That's so. Subaru, yeah, that's right. I can't say I had a pleasant time waking up either, but Subaru's topmost priority was Rem, and then himself. He would never be confused about it. With that intention, Subaru ignored Louis, who was lying down on the grass, and headed towards the forest on the opposite side too. Rem, as I thought, even if I were to be empty, I was right to believe in myself. It was said with a terribly icy, cutting tone. Having that voice murmured by his ear close by, Subaru released a breath with an yay. However, forbidding him from reacting any further, a pair of slender arms snaked themselves around his neck. Rem, who was being carried on Subaru's back, was strangling him from behind. Subaru, gahuk. Rem, saying things that sound pleasant to my ears before inviting me to come with you, and then abandoning the girl. How could I believe someone like that, telling me to put my trust in him? Stop messing around with me. The strength in the arms wrapped around his neck was certainly the strength of an Oni, unlike her physically handicapped legs. Unable to peel her arms away, Subaru's breathing was blocked completely. Bending himself backwards, he wasn't aiming to do so, but he fell onto the grassland on his back. However, in spite of being crushed underneath him, Rem refused to remove her arms from his neck. Since she was behind him, he couldn't flail his arms to free himself from her. Why? The doubts and questions filled up the inside of his head. He shouldn't be asking why, because Rem had already provided the answer to that. In front of her, who didn't know anything, Subaru had made too much haste out of his panicking feelings. He was receiving retribution for that, like this. Rem, letting such a wicked stench drift around yourself, and saying you're not scheming anything is a barefaced lie in itself. Subaru. A wicked stench. Subaru recalled his memories as he heard that. During the time he had just gotten to meet Rem, the biggest reason she doubted him and regarded him as dangerous was by no means the bad impression he gave during their first meeting, nor the shape of the eyes he was born with. The witch's miasma. Having lost her memories, even if Rem didn't have anything left other than herself, she was still able to perceive it. That was the largest factor that bought him Rem's suspicions. He was too late in remembering it, much less even noticing it, and Subaru, ah. Thrashing and twisting his body around, Subaru attempted to make an excuse for his actions, but it was impossible. Like that, Subaru's consciousness fell into the deep abyss of the darkness, slowly and gradually. The last thing he wanted was to be killed by Rem like this. He shouted that out with desperation. His voice was silent, unable to be heard. Subaru, hook, Rem. The abrupt awakening of his consciousness woke up Subaru's upper body as though crashing into him. At that instant, coughing violently due to the pouncing ache of his throat, while spitting out the phlegm stuck there, Subaru somehow raised his body and looked around. The location was the meadow Subaru had been thrown into, those were his circumstances. Though he was in a state of awakening he had remembrance of, he immediately discerned that this spectacle was not one yielded by return by death. Because neither Rem's form nor Louis's form were to be found anywhere in his environs. Subaru, this place is undoubtedly some place I was hurled to. Recalling the preceding moments, the instant he touched his neck, the pain regurgitated repulsive memories. His throat strangled by Rem whom he was carrying, and just like that, he was robbed of his life. No, that was not the case. Subaru, my throat hurts. That means Rem didn't kill me. She did strangle him, but did not go as far as to kill him. Astonished by the judgment of Rem, who'd spoken with such an icy voice, Subaru spilled an exhale of relief and then immediately admonished himself that this was no time to be taking relief. He did not die. In other words, the world was resuming onward from the earlier worst possible turn of events. He had remmed out his humanity due to the scent of the witch, and she had disappeared with the worst possible impression of him maintained. The reason why those two were not here must be because they sought to run away from Subaru. In the end, Rem was repulsed by Subaru's judgment of seeking to leave Louis behind. Casting aside a young child in an unknown meadow, he must have seemed as a truly cold-hearted man. Subaru, I'm telling you that's a misunderstanding, though she probably won't trust me even if I tell her. Whilst lamenting his consecutive misjudgments, Subaru straightened his cheeks and stood up. Upon looking at the sky, he could tell from the position of the sun that not much time had passed. He did not wish to call this as good fortune, but Rem's legs were not in a condition wherein they were at complete liberty either. With her legs in that condition, she shan't be able to run too far off. It's proof. Subaru, there are drag marks on the grass. Now I can run after them. Should he pursue the two who ran into the forest spread wide in 360 degrees around him without any clues, then that would mark the beginning of a game of tag with an impossible level of difficulty. However, should he follow the traces left on the grass, then he would be able to grasp where those two entered the forest from. Though being able to further pursue them from there was the gamble. Subaru, when it comes to unfavorable gambles, I've taken them on for innumerable times. Shouting what was unbefitting of commendation, Subaru fiercely pursued the traces on the grass. With his feat's ability, Subaru was able to immediately discern the position the two entered the forest from. With exuberant foliage and trees, it somewhat matched Subaru's impression of tropical rainforests. For an instant he was reminded of watching information on the television that the Amazon forest meant the point of death for humans as a matter of course. Subaru, if Rem has entered into such a place, then that's all the more reason for me to not overlook it. Both Subaru and Rem were here in a completely unprepared state for entering a forest. When he thought of Rem, who had escaped into the forest with impaired legs in desperation, he regretted why he did something so foolish, and cursed every single bit of his judgments. Subaru, Rem. Come out. Please. I was the one at fault. Within the forest, whilst walking over the soft ground and tall grass, Subaru called with a loud voice. Of course, it was possible that his voice would in turn by Rem and the others' anxiety, and make them keep their distance. But still, it was far better than wandering around aimlessly in the forest, possessing no clues, possessing nothing to rely on. Above all, he must undertake action he deemed as searching for Rem, or it felt like his chest would burst apart due to guilt and self-hatred. Even though so many people made so many efforts for the sake of Rem, should something happen to her, just what would he be able to do in order to apologize? Even though it was not even possible for him to apologize by giving up on his life. Subaru, Rem. Where are you? Please respond. Please, don't leave my side. Thinking that he would not mind even should his voice run dry, within the obstructive trees of the dense jungle, he raised his voice. And his limbs, as he passed through the forest, felt heavy accompanied with tremendous exhaustion. Now that he thought about it, Subaru's body had overcome the fierce skirmishes that occurred in Pleiades' watchtower, and had gotten only a few hours of sleep. Even if his recovery was augmented by the healing of the spirit of the green room, it was bound to eventually fail him. Should he be untactful, then he may collapse out of relief upon finding Rem. His guard up against that absurd possibility, Subaru aimlessly walked through the forest. Subaru, Rem. Please respond. I beg you, I'm sorry. His hands by his mouth, Subaru resumed with a loud voice. A call from the bottom of his heart, yet the absence of any response whatsoever from her made his heart stand a foot away from crumbling. With things remaining as is, pursuing Rem's vanished form, he desperately darted his eyes around the dense trees of the forest. Subaru, dash. When he once again widely opened his mouth seeking to call Rem's name, something entered the vicinity of his field of vision. That was a slight change, peeking through the gaps of the dense trees beyond the fallen leaves. Seeing it move differently from grass swaying in the wind. Subaru, re. It was the instant he embraced hope and turned towards that direction. The impact, charging with tremendous velocity, captured Subaru's chest from the immediate front. Subaru, hook. Unable to shriek, his legs lost balance due to the impact, and Subaru's body flew backwards. Subaru, ga. At. Hook. His thoughts thrown into chaos by the impact from the gaps through the trees directly ahead which he had seen, he darted his eyes around. However, upon thinking about the impact he had received, he immediately understood that it was an attack. Thus, before he could even get his thoughts straight, Subaru tried to leap away from that place. However, he failed to leap. Because... Subaru, Because, the thick arrow piercing through Subaru's chest, had pinned him to the gigantic tree behind him. Subaru, bug. Hook. The moment he directed his awareness to it, he vomited blood overflowing through his throat at once. Stab through, massive quantities of blood from ruptured organs or otherwise flowed out, without cease. Vomiting blood instead of exhaling air, Subaru suffered whilst breathing once again. Whilst suffering, he grabbed the arrow in his chest and tried to pull it out. He couldn't, not in the slightest bit. The arrow had firmly pierced through both Subaru and the tree, disabling all movement. What was this arrow? Hopeless, abnormal, a blow by a thick, mighty arrow. A truly tightly drawn bow, the body pierced by it was stitched and rendered immobile like a bug, only to flounder unsightly. Subaru, egg, rake, gh. Through the gaps of the overflowing blood, he called the name of she who was yet in this forest. What the call, unable to vocalize words, was charged with, was the evocation of caution towards the menace lurking in the forest. Wielding a bow and arrow, someone lurking in the forest had aimed for him. And, in this unseemly manner, unable to reach Rem, unable to accomplish anything, Subaru. Subaru, M. What the hell is going on? Where is this place? What should he do? Welling up fever and pain he took notice of after a delay, spread through his entire body, and blood streamed out of Subaru's eyes, nose, and ears as well. Tasting the sensation of the disappearance of oneself and becoming empty, whilst feeling icy death draw close to him, Subaru strained his eyes, made his throat tremble, and called her name until the end. Called her name, until the end. Smeared in blood. Until the very end of the end, he called, kept calling her name. Kept calling her name. Chapter 2, Animal Tracking. Beatrice, listen, Subaru, I suppose. From now on, you need to understand that you're always on the verge of death, in fact. Subaru, hey, this little girl-sama made a joke that's quite unamusing. Beatrice, Betty is not a little girl, and it's not a joke either, I suppose. You need to take Betty seriously, in fact. As Beatrice said so with a reddened face, Subaru nodded with a got it. He was sitting on the speckless carpet with his legs folded underneath him, in the middle of receiving a lecture from Beatrice Sensei, who was crossing her short arms, but it was simply going nowhere. It was mainly because Subaru was butting into the lecture between her brief pauses, but... Subaru, it's all because of Biko's cuteness. It's not good. Beatrice, Betty thought you finally put on a straight face, but what are you talking about? In fact, well, it's common knowledge that Betty is cute, so that can't be helped by now, I suppose. Subaru, your dear index is tremendous right after we got over the event. Beatrice, you're going too far in pulling the rug out from under Betty. Beatrice stomped on the ground, making her anger known to him. Her current attitude looked like it hadn't changed from before, but on the other hand, Subaru's feelings were largely different. Until now, they had often clashed over their ideas and opinions, and she had the impression of a kitten in a neighborhood that didn't warm up to him easily. However, to Subaru, the current Beatrice was Subaru, like an adorable pet cat that I want to spend time with by burying my face into its stomach. Beatrice, take Betty seriously. I suppose. Subaru, barg. Murmuring that out with deep emotion, he was then sent flying by Beatrice, who had held out her hand towards him. As he stuck to the wall before crumpling down onto the floor, Beatrice gave him an exasperated shrug of her shoulders. Beatrice, don't make Betty repeat herself, in fact. This is an important thing to talk about, I suppose. It's something that's really dangerous if you missed hearing it, in fact. It's about the problem with your gait, I suppose. Subaru, it's about my gait, huh? He lifted up his body abruptly, sitting down cross-legged right on the spot where he had fallen. Placing a gentle hand against his chest, he thought about the organ that was on the inside, something that he couldn't see with his eyes, nor touch it either. Gates were an important organ that existed within living things, utilized in order to use magic in the world that had differing ideas from Subaru's common sense. Whether it was of decent quality or not apparently had to do with one's aptitude for being a magic user, and in Subaru's case, the quality of his gait hadn't been very good. Hadn't been, because his gait was already lost and gone. Beatrice, to be specific, you didn't lose it. You broke it, in fact. Subaru, it's because I used it recklessly even after being told to not use it. Oh well, the next time I see Ferris, I'm going to get far more than a huge scolding. I went ahead and ruined all the treatment he gave me. Beatrice, congratulations on your newfound worries, I suppose. A next time for this isn't guaranteed, in fact. It was the outcome of completely ignoring Ferris's advice, who had been in charge of restoring Subaru's gait that had been strained from being overused. He shrunk out of fear, certain that Ferris would be angry with him with the ferocity of an Oni, but there was a look in Beatrice's eyes that implied the situation was graver than it seemed. Beatrice, as a result of your broken gait, you became unable to release your mana properly, I suppose. Even with that, mana will keep being produced or absorbed for as long as you live, continuing to accumulate in your body, in fact. But, because you don't have a way to get it out. Subaru, surely you won't say that I'll be filled up with mana and burst apart? Beatrice. Subaru, wa, Beatrice-san. It scares me when you become quiet. Subaru raised his voice when she averted her eyes, falling silent with an uneasy expression on her face. Seeing that he looked like he was finally paying serious attention to what she had to say, Beatrice raised a finger with a listen. Beatrice, in all seriousness, your perception of it is correct, in fact. If things go on like this, your physical condition will deteriorate from the mana that gradually builds up in your body, and you'll eventually go boom from the muddied mana, I suppose. Subaru, so scary. Is there a way to do something about it? Beatrice, that's where Betty comes in fact. Fortunately, Betty made a contract with you, Subaru, and we connected ourselves to each other through our souls, I suppose. Just as Betty said, Betty is a little bit different from other spirits, and requires receiving mana from other people, in fact. That means, Subaru, you'll do something about the mana that's piling up in my body, for me. Hearing Beatrice's idea, one that was like a home run which turned the tide of a baseball match, Subaru stood up vigorously and lifted up her small body in his arms. He continued to hold her up in the air as she cried out a NH, starting to spin around on the spot. Subaru, you're amazing, Biko. Actually, I owe your existence so much, I feel like I can't stand on equal ground with you. With this, we're in the same boat in both name and reality. Beatrice, it can't just be settled as that, I suppose. From now on, you must remember that every time you sour Betty's mood, your life is going to be as flimsy as a bunch of foam, in fact. If you don't want to die, continue to put your heart and soul into getting on Betty's good side, I suppose. Subaru, so you're telling me to keep giving it my all and being affectionate with you. If anything, it depends on how long you can continue being spectacular and dazzling. That's a big responsibility on your shoulders, Biko. Biko, why does Betty need to be told that, in fact? Betty can't accept it, I suppose. Subaru kept spinning around while he listened to Beatrice's red-faced shouting, with her still held up in his arms. Spinning around, round and round. Round and round, and round and round, and round and round. Like that, the sensation of his field of view being spun around suddenly came to an end, and his consciousness was awakened. The agony he was suffering through just before, something similar to the feeling of drowning, had vanished without warning, and Subaru was assaulted by the pain of the unbalanced rhythm of his breathing, as well as the size of the ground that he felt on his back. Subaru, gag. He sat up while rubbing his throat, retracing his memories of what happened to himself. At the same time, when he glanced at the center of his chest, he didn't see the arrow that was supposed to be sticking out from there. Aside from it, the scratches he had gotten from scraping his body against the trees had also disappeared. It was only natural it turned out like this. His chest had been pierced by that single, frightening blow. Subaru, died. Experiencing a vague sensation which felt like the ground was crumbling away from under his feet, Subaru's blood ran cold as he shuddered. As for the events which led to this, he was swallowed by the black shadow at the Pleiades watchtower, and only a few dozen minutes after he was whisked away from there, that was all it took for Subaru to lose his life. Once again, he understood the severity of the position he was in, and stood up. Somehow managing to support his unsteady body, Subaru surveyed his surroundings. And then, Subaru, shit, this sucks. Confirming he was in the middle of a green, grassy plain that stretched far and wide, and also seeing the figure he wished would have stayed with him was nowhere to be found, Subaru cursed his misfortune. This was unmistakably the grassland where he and the other two had been hurled to from the tower. The problem was he couldn't find Rem, who had been sent here together with him, and Lewis was missing as well. To sum it up, the point in time where he had returned by death to was Subaru, after Rem choked me and made me pass out. His restart point was the time after he had fallen unconscious, strangled by Rem, who he had been carrying on his back. It hadn't brought him back far enough to make it so that Rem's awakening never happened, and it also didn't make it so that his final loop at the Pleiades watchtower never existed, either. That in itself was what Subaru wanted to say was good news. Or, if he had been able to return to the final loop at the tower, it wasn't like he didn't hope for the possibility that he could have exchanged words with the missing Rem, a hope which only lasted for a fleeting moment, but... Subaru, am I an idiot? No, I am definitely an idiot. If he bore the feelings of regret to such a large extent, he should have made more time for her while he could still afford to come into contact with her, while he still had the time to speak to her, and while he was still graced with the opportunity to listen to her about how she felt. To Natsuki Subaru, who hadn't done so, he had no right to be lamenting in that manner. Anyhow, right now. Subaru, I'll find Rem. He had to chase after the runaway girl, and he had to clear up her misunderstandings. If the reason for Rem's escape was the witch's miasma that encircled him, then since he had just returned by death, the intensity of the smell had probably gotten stronger. It was very likely that she would heed his words even less compared to before. However, the 1 year Natsuki Subaru had spent wasn't so meaningless, to the point he would give up on her because of something like that. Subaru, also, there's the one who killed me. Though, the arrow shouldn't be an attack from Rem. The worst-case scenario would be Rem launching an attack on him, which was a possibility that existed, but he couldn't imagine her being able to gather the tools she needed to do so in such a short time. Even more so, a bow and arrow was something that couldn't be prepared so easily and quickly. Subaru, the arrow that pierced into me had an arrowhead, and it also had feathers attached to it. Might have been because it punched through my heart, but I didn't feel too much pain. Even though, if Rem were to be struck by the heavy-hitting, powerful arrow that was fired from the bow, then she wouldn't stand a chance against it even with her strength. Since she was unable to move her legs around freely, it would be difficult for her escape to succeed. At any risk, Subaru had to rescue her out of this place before she fell victim to the arrow. Even if the amnesiac Rem didn't consider him as an ally, that was. Subaru, time to go, Natsuki Subaru. Show him how great you can be. Slapping his cheeks, what he temporarily dismissed from his mind was the shock of death from just before, and the sorrow he felt from being disliked by the girl that was important to him. It was unknown if he could join her even if he found her, but finding her came first before anything else. Being woeful and being angry were all things that could be done while one was alive. Subaru. Letting out a deep breath, in the same way as he had done previously, Subaru trailed after the footprints that he deduced Rem had followed, judging by the grass that was tipping downwards, and jumped into the forest. However, he was undecided on the decision of whether he should raise his voice loudly while looking for her, or not. He had gone through an initiation process courtesy of the arrow, probably because the enemy came across Subaru while he was defenseless. Whoever they were, their identity and objective were both obscure, but it was difficult to think of them as an amicable person, seeing they aimed to kill him with a single blow. There would be death if they found him. He should regard them as that kind of enemy. Subaru, but, since they're using tools. A bow and arrow, it's not a witch beast, but it's a human I'm up against. If his opponent was a human, then there was a chance he could get out of this situation without trying to kill each other, depending on how he negotiated with them. Although, he didn't know if they would even sit at the table of negotiations to start with. For the most part, in the total number of times Subaru had returned by death so far, the percentage of his deaths that were caused by humans and witch beasts seemed like it was leaning slightly towards humans. Just because his opponent was a human who could understand what he was saying, didn't mean he thought he could blindly form friendly relations between them. He did think the likelihood of finding Rem would increase if there were more people that were looking for her, but Subaru, Cor Leonis. Shutting his eyes, Subaru drove away his rambling thoughts, activating the authority that rested within himself. The brand new power which demonstrated its fierceness in the Pleiades watchtower, Cor Leonis, was a probing skill that enabled him to detect the locations of his companions, those who would support the little king. Using this, Subaru desperately clung onto the hope that he could pinpoint where Rem was at. However, Subaru, it's no good, there's no reaction. She might have gone far away from me, or if that's not it, is it because she doesn't think of me as an ally? Little was known about the exact range of Cor Leonis, but Subaru didn't see the pale light which indicated his allies in the area where the ability took effect. Thinking of the cause of being unable to detect their locations, Subaru came up with the distance between them and his relationships with them. Emilia and the others had once been the targets of its effects, but he currently couldn't perceive them at all. Even if he personally knew both Reed and Gluttony, he didn't know their locations as well. He was certainly able to ascertain the activation of Cor Leonis. If he were to say it, his ally radar was turned on, although it was in a non-reactive state. The reason why it became like that would be because Emilia and the others were outside of its range of effect, and Rem, who was supposed to be inside of its scope, didn't place Subaru under her category of allies. The fact he also didn't know the location of Lewis, who was acting in unison to Rem, attested to his theory. Subaru, there's no way I'll ever treat her as an ally. It's why she won't appear on my radar that has my one-sided love for Rem. Coming to this point, Subaru regretted the poor communication that had occurred when he came into contact with Rem. Since he was wrapped around in the witch's miasma, he was unsure of which words he could have chosen to say would have won over her trust. Despite that, even if he were to be deceitful, he was unable to say anything pertaining to protecting Lewis nor bringing her along with him. Subaru, shit, damn it. Why? Rem finally woke up, so why do I have to play tag with her like this? He had been waiting eagerly for the day Rem could stand up and move around freely on her own two legs, but when she actually sprang into motion like this, Subaru couldn't help but resent it. If he thought about who he should loathe as a result, all it did was make his anger surge up, directed towards the sin archbishops of gluttony, involving Lewis as well. Subaru. Keeping the thoughts in his mind that were going around in circles, Subaru gingerly moved through the forest. He kept his body lowered as he walked because of the person that killed him. Once he would be referring to them as a hunter since it was more convenient, but it was a desperate measure he took in order to avoid making contact with the hunter. Subaru thought he should do something more, such as rubbing mud on his face, camouflaging his clothes with leaves, and applying the effects of deceptive colors onto himself, but he unfortunately couldn't spend his time on those things. If he at least precisely knew how much time passed after he was separated from Rem, his search for her would be getting somewhere. Subaru, think. It's only during these times I can make use of my crafty mind. Rem forgot everything, and doesn't remember. But, she still had the ability to hold me down and sense the witch's miasma. It means her episodic memories are missing. Amnesia often had an appearance in manga and games, but in most cases, the amnesia handled in these works corresponded to the lack of what were called episodic memories. It was the same condition as Subaru, who lost his memories once in the tower as the consequence of coming across gluttony. No, that Subaru had only lost his memories which were made after arriving at the different world, so Rem wasn't exactly in the same state as him, but it was something similar to that. In other words, she was in a state where she knew the names of things, and she also remembered the reflexive actions absorbed into her body, but she lost the memories of her own name and the names of other people, as well as any details that tied into her recollections of the time she spent with them. The evidence of Rem calling herself I, and being instinctively on her guard against Subaru because of the scent, was proof of that. Subaru, she must be confused. She can't keep running away forever. If she separated herself from me to some extent, then she'll make some time to calm down and reflect on herself. Even more so, if she took Lewis with her. It was stupid of him to pray for such a thing, but he just wanted to wish Lewis would be a grand hindrance and get in the way of Rem's escape. Throwing tantrums, refusing to walk sometimes, and continuing to cause Rem a lot of trouble, a chance for him to catch up to Rem would eventually come around if those things happened. Or, it was also okay if Rem forsook her. If Rem decided she wouldn't be able to look after her because she couldn't handle her, that could also. Subaru, actually, I don't know about that. He didn't know if Rem would abandon Lewis, seeing that she at least looked like a helpless infant. Losing her episodic memories and being nobody in a sense, it could be said Rem didn't have the inferiority complex she had from interacting with Ram, nor the establishment of her own identity. Despite losing the existence of Ram, it was abnormal how Ram could remain stable, with there being no changes. He wondered if the same thing would happen to Rem. She wasn't sisters with Ram, her inferiority complex and her pride as a member of the Oni clan was irrelevant to her, and she thought nothing of Natsuki Subaru. That Rem. Subaru, hook. As soon as he imagined it, Subaru felt a burning sensation in his chest, and took a large, mighty step forward. The twigs he took his emotions out on by stepping on them creaked before snapping, and he leaned forward while walking around the tall grass that sat in front of him, nearly slipping on the muddy ground. Subaru, ah! Unexpectedly, the forest had opened up into a different terrain, and Subaru found he had exited out of it into another grassy plain. Thinking he might have gone around the forest in circles, only to end up in the same place, the color drained from Subaru's face. However, when he observed the area attentively, he realized it wasn't the case. It was similar to the first grassland, but the height of the grass beneath his feet were different. Compared to the grassy plain at the beginning, the grass here was slightly taller. Adding to it, that place was completely surrounded by forests at a 360-degree angle, but this area only had the forest Subaru had rushed out of. In front of him with the forest at his back, he could see a large horizon between the rifts in the grassland. The sky looked terribly far away and high up in the air, and the illusion of mysteriously feeling like he was being sucked into it was making the ground beneath him unsteady. However, it wasn't only the faraway sky that caught his eye. Closer and nearer to him than that, there was a small, open area created by cutting apart the grassland, and the camping tools placed over there. In short, it was a sign of someone previously having been here. Subaru. Instantaneously, caution swelled and bubbled all over Subaru's body, and his field of view was narrowed drastically. Fortunately, there weren't any silhouettes at the place he should refer to as a simple camping ground. Only the possible traces of someone camping out here remained, and it was hard to think of it as a trap. The problem was about who exactly created this camping site. Subaru, the highest possibility for that is the one who killed me. Right? He thought about the hunter that brought him down. Upon proceeding to carry out a hunt in the forest, the odds of them setting this place as their base camp were high. If it came to that, then Subaru should immediately move away from here and ensure his own safety. Whether he came across them in the forest or on a plain, there was no doubt the hunter was a dangerous individual. It was often said that the Matagi shot humans by accident because they mistook them for deer, but mistakenly shooting someone that was looking for their acquaintance while shouting loudly, because one confused them for a deer, was simply impossible when Subaru took their skills into consideration. The hunter was a threatening enemy. He needed to conclude it as such before acting. However, Subaru, if I could filch at least one knife. In order to march through the close-knit trees of what he should call a dense forest, Subaru wanted the assistance of a tool. Unfortunately, the only item which was currently in his possession was the whip he used regularly, the guilty whip, crafted out of the materials from a powerful enemy. His outfit, one that was for conquering the sandy sea, was kind of coming in handy for the conquering of the dense forest. Nevertheless, his situation would change drastically if he had even one bladed tool to cut up the trees so he could get a move on. Therefore, things would go rather differently if he could obtain a single tool that was something like it. Viewing it as such, Subaru finished his short period of contemplation and walked towards the camping grounds. He also had the choice to immediately make a quick turn and return to the forest, but considering what he was after, he wanted to avoid going back there empty-handed. While paying attention to his footsteps and surroundings, Subaru entered the site. Subaru, there's marks left from when they made a fire, and it's shoddy, but... Is this a bed? He knew the traces of a burning fire were left in the center of the camp, and also that there was something which looked like a bed next to it, lined up with cut grass. There was no doubt someone had been living here. The bed was empty as well, and it seemed like there was nothing else in the area, but... Subaru, if I could just find a knife, or something like that. Huh, so you want a blade? Well, you have made your appearance at the right time. The moment Subaru tried to find a tool he could use, going on a brief search around the camp, he stopped as he heard a voice speak behind him and felt something cold being held to his neck. His breath catching in his throat, upon lowering his gaze slowly, Subaru saw that the object raised against the right side of his neck was the blade of a sword, polished and refined beautifully. Subaru. Holding his breath, Subaru understood that he had given his opponent the right to decide whether to kill him or let him live. However, his head was in a state of confusion because of the fact he had been spoken to from behind. He was cautious. He was cautious, with calculations thrown out of the window, because he was in a situation with his life on the line. Of course, among the superhumans that lived in this other world, he knew there were people who could move at a speed his eyes couldn't catch up to, and there were also people who could even pull off the likes of teleportation. Despite that, Subaru, did I really manage to roll one of the few exceptions here, at this time? How unlucky can I be? Fool. Who said you could speak? You are to choose each and every one of your words with utmost care. Do not forget that your life is within my hands. Even as Subaru cursed his own misfortune, there was no mercy in the voice of the person behind him. Just as they said, they would probably immediately send his head flying if he tried anything funny. Feeling the indubitable, overpowering pressure asserting that things would definitely turn out like that, Subaru desperately tried to think of any ways he could make a breakthrough. Judging from the voice, the person was a man. Because he sounded quite young, he could be around the same age as Subaru, or slightly older. The way the man chose his words was peculiar, but it strangely didn't feel odd to him. And, more than anything, man, I see you are racking your brains in deep thought whilst your mouth remains closed. However, you are not thinking of throwing away your life and attempting to strike back. The man had the insight that allowed him to discern the silent Subaru's inward thoughts. It seemed like he had considered something while looking at Subaru's back, as he let out a breath that sounded like he was mulling over his thoughts, and... Man, you are dressed in a style that I do not see around these places. I do not believe it is suitable for the climate in Budheim either. Pale hands and feet. You are not from the local area. Subaru, I'm... Whoa. Man, silence. Who said you could open your mouth? If you are to incur my displeasure next time, I would like to see you try speaking even after your head is separated from your body. The man had no intention of engaging in the conversation. Subaru was forced to realize it when a shallow cut was delivered to his neck. Along with the pain from the prickling sensation, blood gradually spilled over the wound and trickled down his neck, but the man wasn't finished yet with his examination of Subaru. Man, the whip at your waist is also extremely, terribly inconvenient to use in a forest. Your arms and legs are also somewhat trained, but it is not so much as to arrange you into the line of wolves. It seems like you did not come here chasing after me. Subaru. Man, why is it that you have fallen silent? If you would not explain yourself, would you rather die here? Subaru, I'm allowed to speak this time. Isn't that unreasonable? When Subaru protested against the man's unfairness, the stern gaze boring into the back of his head became sharper. Subaru stiffened, grasping that he said something unnecessary, but the rigidity of his body was finally loosened as the sword against his neck was drawn back. However, man, turn around slowly. If you try anything funny, Subaru, you'll lop off my head? Man, no. I will sever your limbs, gouge out your heart, and incinerate it in front of your eyes. Subaru, a threat that's way too evil. Subaru got the message of the threat from its intensity, raising both of his hands, and started turning around bit by bit while proving he had no intention to counterattack. And then, he took his time to set his eyes on the man that managed to get behind him. Subaru, are you serious? He came face to face with the man in front of him, whose face was hidden behind a rag wrapped around it. He really was a strange-looking man. His height was only slightly above Subaru's, and his physique looked vaguely slim. Showing his slender limbs as he stood, he held something similar to a saber or a rapier in his hand, a thin-bladed sword that had given a shallow slice to Subaru's neck. The outfit he wore consisted of noble-like clothes of excellent quality, and it could be said his style was more out of place than Subaru's appearance. If he looked closely, he could see that the rag wrapped around his face might have been a cape. Whether he sustained an injury on his face, or whether he simply didn't want to show his face, it wasn't clear why he wore the rag on his face, but... Masked man, what is it? With your idiotic face. Subaru, setting it aside if you meant idiotic look by that, I was born with this face, so doesn't it count as bad-mouthing me? There's this and that, but my reaction can't be helped especially after looking at your appearance. Masked man, you are making assumptions. I am also looking at your face, currently being once again suspicious if you are an assassin or not. Subaru, people don't get jobs assigned to them because of what their eyes look like. My role is just the exact opposite of an assassin in the first place. Rather than going on the offensive, I'm more of a defensive kind of guy. Without loosening up his vigilance, the masked man continued to point his sword at Subaru. Responding to his voice that was laced with doubt, Subaru looked at the masked man's equipment, and then at his baggage which was placed behind him, before furrowing his brow. The man's outfit, ill-suited for any camping or activity in the forest, had attracted Subaru's attention, but what drew his focus more than it was the sack lying down behind him. Subaru could only see it as something that materialized into the clearing without any warning, the same as the man that had appeared behind his back. Adding to that, it was about the masked man's equipment. He didn't have a bow, nor did he have any arrows. Subaru, it seems like you're probably not the hunter. Masked man, hunter? Subaru, it's a personal matter. By the way, are you able to do things like crossing a distance instantaneously, or becoming invisible, stuff like that? Masked man. The moment he asked the question, the man's black eyes, able to be seen from the gap in his mask, were narrowed. However, the masked man's reaction wasn't one of anger nor one thinking of deserting him, but it was a reaction showing he took an interest in Subaru. In fact, when the man let out a small sigh with a huh. Masked man, why have you reached an idea such as that? State your reasoning. Subaru, I was cautious of my surroundings before coming closer to this place, just in case. Of course, I know there's tons of people who can tear through anything as poor as my caution, but you're not one of them. Masked man, why is that? Subaru, I want you to listen without getting mad at me, but I had a lot of opportunities to coincidentally come across a bunch of skilled people, or what you would call superhumans. Comparing you to those crazy guys, I get the feeling from you that you're ordinary. If he was talking to a notable warrior, what he said would definitely offend him. Even so, it was what Subaru felt after facing the masked man in a conversation. He observed that the man in front of him was unquestionably able to use a sword, but his skill was average, having gotten to that point with a certain amount of training. Looking at him from Subaru's eyes, who knew people such as Reinhardt, Garfield, Wilhelm, and Julius, he could only say the masked man was inferior when he measured them side by side. Subaru, if that's so, then the theory of you jumping here outside of my perception will be null and void. What's left is the possibility of you instantly closing the distance and appearing behind me, or if that's not it. Masked man, it was either that, or I have disappeared from your sight by utilizing concealment. Subaru, hook. Soon after, Subaru jolted with astonishment as the man vanished from his field of view, despite having been standing in front of him. However, his surprise didn't end there. Subaru, you disappeared. But, are you right in front of me? Masked man, you are correct. Concealment cannot remove even my presence. Receiving Subaru's question, the masked man blinked back into view the moment he replied, standing in the same exact place and the same posture as before. As he thought, the man hadn't disappeared in the sense of being gone, but he only disappeared in the sense of being invisible. And, the fact he returned from that state the moment he answered Subaru's question meant. Subaru, it gets cancelled if you touch someone, or they become aware of you. Masked man, although, it is the ideal tool for holding one's breath and lying low whilst being hidden. Saying that, the masked man lowered the sword he was pointing at Subaru, and directed it at the edge of the camping grounds. He was aiming it towards where his sack was placed. Masked man, the bed is a decoy. I was holding my breath over there, just slightly far away from it. I saw you sneak into here from the very beginning. How humorous you were. Subaru, looking from the side, people look super dumb when they're on alert. Wait, that's not important right now. You lowered your sword, so that means. Masked man, you are not my pursuer. I have no clue of how, nor your motives, but you must be someone that has gotten lost. If so, I have no reason to condemn you severely for that. Neither do I need to teach you a lesson with this blade. As if indicating he had no intention to fight, the masked man withdrew the bare sword back into the sheath at his waist. Seeing it through, the tension in Subaru's body finally softened. The moment he relaxed, he came to remember his original plan. Subaru, it's not the time to be calming myself. Hey, sorry for all these questions, but did you see a blue-haired girl? We got separated around here. Masked man, blue hair? No, I have not. Rather, making my way to this place, the first thing I saw was your face. What are you going to do about this? Subaru, I won't do anything about it, though. I won't do anything about it, but... Shit, it ended in failure here too, huh? Hey, this is a maybe, but is it possible for you to help me look for? Masked man. Subaru, yeah, just as I thought. He failed to obtain a witness statement, and his last resort, relying on the rope of human relations, had also been chopped off in front of him. Subaru received the masked man's icy glare, knife-like to the point that it might cut anything that touched it, as the answer to his request. Like that, in order to take back the time he lost, he tried to return to the forest. Masked man, halt. If you were separated in this forest, then reuniting is not a feat that could be done so easily. Although, I believe the best course of action is for you to prioritize your survival? Subaru. Sorry, but not a chance. It's just that she's more important than my life. I'll reunite with her no matter what it takes. No, I need to bring her home. Masked man, more than your life, huh? Setting aside the bardic poetry of songstresses, I can only imagine those as empty words if I hear it in reality. I can only imagine it as that, but what is interesting are your eyes. When the intensity of Subaru's gaze sharpened from the man's attitude of ridiculing his recklessness, the man exactly pointed a finger towards his eyes. As Subaru drew back, thinking he was going to poke his eyes out, the masked man chuckled at him. Masked man, those are eyes that do not tell lies nor slander. I do not know if it will remain the same when it is actually weighed on a scale with your life, but at this moment, it seems like you apparently did not line up any words of deceit. Subaru, so what? If what I'm saying is true, what will it? Masked man, it will more or less capture my interest. I shall allow you to borrow my intellect. With a finger, the masked man tapped the area around his temple. Listening to his answer, Subaru thought he should just yell out, "Stop messing around," at the man, but any harsh remarks such as that didn't leap out of his throat. Mysteriously, this was a strange thing as well, but he couldn't find any feelings of suspicion he could direct towards the man. No, the man was shady. However, he had a persuasiveness that overpowered it. It was most likely the effect of the natural-born charisma he held. Masked man, describe the details of what exactly transpired. I will find you a way to search for her. Subaru, me and her were suddenly hurled to this place. Before he knew it, Subaru was starting to answer the man's question, slowly and steadily. It wasn't as if he actually believed in this guy, or trusted him either. It was just that he was desperate enough to be grasping at straws. When he felt like this, he wanted to rely on someone, even if they were less trustworthy than a pile of straw. Maybe, it was just about that. Masked man, you were careless. Like that, having finished hearing Subaru's explanation of his circumstances, the masked man's first words in response were biting. Just as he had been asked by the man, Subaru had given a clean description of what happened between him and Rem, omitting the complicated situation which also surrounded them. He told him that Rem's memories were jumbled, and that she had escaped after knocking him out. And he also included the part where she was acting together with a dangerous little girl. Subaru, I know, I was being a huge idiot. But, you won't stop there, right? Exposing my recently acquired dark past, and being done after making fun of me. Masked man, fool. How could I bother to go as far as using my precious time to deride a jester such as yourself? That girl, she is able to think on her feet to a certain degree, yes? Subaru, yeah, I think so, maybe. Intimidated by the air the masked man was giving off, Subaru nodded truthfully. As a versatile maid, Rem played an active part in the various moments of daily life, but an evaluation such as that couldn't be obtained just by being skilled at doing housework. Determining the abilities of different people and placing them where it would be appropriate for them, before letting them act. Even during fights, she predicted his movements and moved in sync with him, despite him not saying anything to invoke that. Rem was smart. Even if her memories had been lost. Masked man, if that is so, it is highly feasible that you have been plotted against. Subaru, PL, plotted against? You're saying I got tricked? That's... I don't. Masked man, in this case, whether she has her memories or not is not the problem. What is important is that the girl is aware she is being chased after, and she has the capability to come up with this and that against her pursuer. For example. Cutting off his words there, the masked man stared at Subaru from head to toe with his black eyes. Feeling like his thoughtlessness was being criticized, Subaru drew his shoulders closer to himself. Looking at Subaru, the masked man narrowed his eyes. Masked man, for example, something such as purposely leaving traces in the grassland to disguise the direction she had escaped in. Subaru. Masked man, you must have been quite anxious after you awakened from being knocked unconscious. When you felt like you needed to find her as soon as possible, what would you do if there were footsteps placed there as if it was being shown off to you? Ardent and eager, Subaru had run after the traces like a mongrel. It was what happened in reality, and it was the answer to the mocking gaze of the masked man. Of course, he could make a retort, saying that wasn't it, but... Subaru. Sure enough, I couldn't find any more traces deeper into the forest, coming from the entrance. But, I thought it was because the path was unsteady and hard to walk on. Masked man, you do not avert your eyes from the truth that is inconvenient to yourself. Subaru, I've known that I'm stupid and an idiot for a long time. It's only that I have a gift for adaptability and willpower, something I'm on the same page with the other me. It couldn't be conveyed even if he said it, but Subaru replied to the masked man as such. Truthfully, the man's speculation made a lot of sense. Looking back on it, the traces left on top of the grass felt way too obvious. Among wild animals such as foxes and rabbits, there were those that did things such as purposely leaving behind footprints and jumping into a clump of grass midway, utilizing techniques which confused their predators. The marks Rem left on the grass were the same, so what if it was a cunning trap in order to deceive him? Subaru, she made me go to a different direction, and went the other way instead. Masked man, in that case, the direction one will choose to go would often be the exact opposite. It is reasonable to select the method in which she could keep away as far as she could, considering her state of mind. Do you understand? Subaru, it's frustrating, but I get it. Damn. That Rem. Just as the masked man said, if Rem had deliberately left visible tracks as a decoy, there was a high possibility she had made her escape towards the opposite direction. However, if Subaru managed to get a good guess on her actions and went to the forest on the other side, he might be able to work out something to catch her. He somewhat felt like a villain, but... Subaru, I'm used to giving others a bad first impression because of stuff like my face and body odor. I'll definitely catch up to her. Masked man, how high-spirited. Here, take this with you. Subaru, UA. Standing up, as Subaru attempted to dash away, unable to stand still for any longer, the masked man threw something at him after palming his sack of his belongings. As Subaru looked at the thing he just caught in his hands, he saw it was a small knife, fitted inside of a leather sheath. When he widened his eyes at it, the masked man shrugged his shoulders. Masked man, it is not a forest you could confront with a single whip. Utilize it to the best of your ability. Subaru, I'm really thankful for it, but... Are you sure? I can't do anything in return right now. Masked man, I do not mind. Sometimes, I would like to be the one who bestows to another. Or, will you make an effort to deprive me of every one of my belongings with the knife? It sounded like he was joking, but it was true that he had given Subaru the power to carry it out. The masked man had a certain amount of skill, but it couldn't be declared that Subaru didn't have a chance against him, no matter how slim it was. In that sense, the man's actions were akin to a type of gamble. However, Subaru, my name is Natsuki Subaru. This is unmistakably a debt that I owe you. I'll definitely return the favor that I was given. I won't try anything ungrateful. Firmly fastening the knife he received on his waist, Subaru bowed deeply. Looking at that, the masked man let out a small scoff with a humph. Masked man, I have already shown you the way. Get on with it and go. By all possible means, you are to make every effort in winning over the trust of the runaway girl. Subaru, I totally agree. Thanks for the help. Oh wait, that's that, but... Masked man, what is it? Waving his hand to express his gratitude, Subaru paused right as he was about to rush into the forest. The masked man's voice had a hint of exasperation in it because of how busy he looked, but Subaru pointed his finger at the forest in front of him. "Subaru, I'm passing through here to go back to the grassland I was in, but you shouldn't really use this path. There's a frightening hunter in here. They'll try to kill you from afar with a bow, so no matter how many lives you have, it won't be enough against them. If you're going somewhere, I recommend you to take a detour around the forest." Masked man. "I see. I understand. I will keep it in mind." Subaru, "Yeah, please do that. See you." Hearing the masked man's response, Subaru succeeded in preventing his benefactor from immediately being killed by the hunter, avoiding a potential situation that left a bad taste in his mouth. And then, racing into the forest as fast as he could, he started running for the first grassland with all his might. "Subaru, it cuts really well." Fortunately, Subaru didn't have much trouble returning to the first grassland. It was because the knife he received from the masked man had a sharp edge, giving him a huge boost in slicing off the branches and leaves that obstructed his path. Normally, when it came to a knife like this, it seemed like its blade would be heavily chipped if it were to be overused, but he felt no inconveniences such as that. Perhaps it might be an excellent blade of the highest quality. Subaru, his clothes looked pretty expensive, too. Who exactly was that guy? While wondering about it, Subaru returned to the original grassland with great haste. After that, when he searched around the area where he had been led towards the opposite way, Subaru found it. This must be it. Just now, on the other side of the marks placed for show, Subaru discovered a set of footsteps left in an uneven shape on the grass. It looked like Rem had tried her best to rub out the tracks, but it was very likely that she could only erase her own, and couldn't fully erase Lewis's. Since traces of the effort that was put into removing the tracks were there, it was implausible to think of this as an additional decoy. Which meant, "Subaru, finally, I got something on you, Rem." Although he was self-conscious of it earlier, he uttered the words that made him straight up sound like a villain, running as fast as he could while chasing after the marks which became his newly discovered sign of Rem's location. The tracks which continued to the entrance of the forest were the same as last time. However, it wasn't possible to disguise the broken twigs at the entrance, nor the footprints in the mud. "Subaru, I found it. If I use this, I can catch up to Rem," Subaru thought as he attempted to track the footprints in the mud with eagerness. It was the next moment. Subaru, hook! As Subaru paid attention to the footprints, a tied vine broke apart below his feet. The recoil made the branch it was supporting shoot out towards him, and a powerful blow struck him from the side. Subaru, ugh. Receiving a horizontal lash from a branch about as thick as his arm, Subaru was sent flying at a long distance. A pained cry escaped from him as he rolled across the mud, unable to stand up from the impact of the blow. His vision flashing and flickering between light and dark, and hit by a surprise attack that he wasn't expecting, Subaru's consciousness twirled around like the revolving light of a police car from the pain and the shock. "Subaru, alright now, could that be?" When the pain was mitigated after a while, Subaru finally stood up on the spot. Though, he knew it was affecting his knees, and he also knew that a massive amount of internal damage was done on the side of his body. However, his shock extended beyond that. Subaru, a trap? Although she was running away, she wouldn't end it with a simple escape. Despite having lost her memories, she could exert herself to the fullest. That was how fearsome the girl Rem could be. Natsuki Subaru finally realized it then and there. That this was the beginning of his second real, genuine battle with Rem, ever since he arrived at this world. End of chapters 1 and 2, Initiation.